What used to be an insult but now is a compliment. I used to get teased for my full lips at school. Kipper lips was a very common nickname back in the UK 80s/90s. Now people spend so much money on makeup, treatment, surgical procedures, not to mention all the duck-pout pictures, just to have full, plump lips. When I was 11-15, I had people tell me they thought I was older, ranging from 17-22. It was mostly older teens, but some 40-plus-year-old adults thought I was older than I was. When I was 11, I had someone hit on me because he thought I was 20, and being little old innocent me, I had no idea I was being hit on by a 40-year-old man. He freaked out when his friend, my foster brother-in-law, yes, it gets confusing to explain, said I was 11. Everyone thought I was the oldest of my siblings till I reached 15. Once I was 15, I either looked my age or looked younger. I'm 20 now and I've had a lot of people say, I look 16. It sucks because I used to look older but now I somehow look younger to everyone. Either I somehow aged backwards or everyone suddenly is maturing a lot sooner than they used to. A lot of us do. I'm in my mid-20s and would be able to pass for 16 if I made a tiny effort. I'd say to you, own it. I still have to show my ID at times when visiting bars. The legal drinking age is 18, Sweden. My tip to you is to always bring your ID and basically show it before the bartender even asks for it, and be humble about it. My experience, both as a guest and a bartender myself, is you get better service. It shows you're confident, the good kind. Look at this, here, I brought the card. No one ever said elves are nice. That one's sneaky. The modern meaning of nice is good, friendly, and maybe charitable. The archaic meaning of nice is naive, simple-minded, gullible. With one word he paints them as smart and cunning manipulators, the antonym of nice. But also the antonym of nice. I really should get around to reading all his books. I've only gotten to a couple so far, but everything he writes is so clever. Fallen London comes to mind. Being a text-based browser game, there's a lot of writing that goes into it, and the quality of writing in that game has won awards, and continues to be exceptionally good and constantly improving. In a lot of ways it's a celebration of literature and all forms of prose, with one minor faction in the game being entirely devoted to using careful wording to deceive and mislead for the good of London, the Mithridacy office. It's a good time to join right now as well. A new event is about to start on Monday that's being billed as the first and last of its kind, an event made to celebrate the community and showcase a lot of new lore. I don't read as much as I used to and don't really have many good book suggestions, as most of the books I've read are half remembered at best at this point. I think it's safe to recommend the author whose work prompted this discussion, Terry Pratchett, but as far as I recall, most other authors I've read don't employ this kind of wordplay. In folklore, elves are like evil fey creatures who would steal your children, cause illness, seduce faithful people. They appear as sort of demonic forces in early medieval Germanic and Scandinavian prayers. Early etymological synonyms are Alfred, nightmare, and Alp, evil spirit. Interestingly enough, the word elf is derived from elf. Basically, if someone was afflicted with a mental or physical disorder, it was blamed on elves. So mentally challenged equals slow-witted and clumsy, not PC. I know, but I didn't make this shit up. Equals oaf. It wasn't until 1596 in Shakespeare that the popular perception of elf was changed to represent the Little Midsummer Night's Dream kind elves, and then in the 20th century, Santa's Christmas elves, and then a bit later, Tolkien's high fantasy elves. Tolkien's elves are also mostly in line with Pratchett's descriptions, especially the Noldor. Remember Galadriel? There was a reason she was still in Middle-earth, in a place everybody else had long since abandoned. She was in exile for a lot of shit. Rejecting the ring was her act of repentance. 7,000 years earlier, she'd have totally taken the ring and become a queen, and all would love her in despair. That said, elves were capable of repentance. The older do repent and are slowly forgiven. The vainer are so ridiculously full of themselves that they don't interact with anyone. They're crazy racist. The Telleri are most of your heroic elves, though Elrond is half human, and his humanness actually rubs off on Rivendell. They're not the bunch of isolationist pricks willing to commit atrocities. I want to add something interesting. Bunyan in Malay culture is the same as elves, but their nature is very the same. Kidnapping children, illness regarded as beautiful, mythful-like creature, psychically humanely, but evil. As the saying goes, the most good Bunyan is the same as the evilest human. I found this interesting, how in the West and East have some similar folklore. What really happened in the past? Did they really exist? In the old days, folk will make some ritual to summon them to borrow food wares for wedding. I'm in my 40s too. I did not have that stick figure beauty standard as a teen. I tried diet, exercise, reduction garments, but my genetics gave me all the boobs, ass, and thunder thighs. Even my gym teachers were cruel, calling me fat ass and demanding I work it off, which works the opposite. BTW just builds it all up bigger, firmer, more noticeable. After decades I finally come into my own though. I'm not just another fat ass anymore, I'm thick. Now that there are clothes that look good and made to show off these curves, I'm loving it. The paradigm change. Here's a thinker. In the 1920s it was incredibly unfashionable for women to have big breasts. The market was flooded with equipment intended to hide the bust to achieve that flapper look. Big tits were for old ladies and country girls. In order to be an upper-crust socialite or an independent career woman you needed to be thin, and if you had tits those pearls wouldn't fall right. Something similar happened when Leslie Twiggy Lawson became the first international supermodel in the 1960s. She was 5 feet 6 inches and 100 pounds soaking wet. Fashion went crazy for that tiny body shape for a good 10 years. And none of it looked right if you had more than a handful anywhere. It wasn't everything, but it was the style of the time and enough to generate flack among the fashion conscious if you didn't look good in things designed for the boyishly thin. It's very common for having big T and A to be looked down upon in upper-class society on a cyclical basis, whereas T and A is always popular in lowbrow or simply lower-class media and culture. Attraction is based on societal standards as much as anything else. If you're constantly hearing one type of person described as beautiful while growing up, when you hit puberty that's the kind of person you are gonna think it pretty. Because as a child your brain picked up on common themes between different people who were called pretty or beautiful. It's honestly amazing how much of our perception of things is influenced by culture. For instance, the Greeks could quite literally barely see the color blue because there was no word for blue in ancient Greek. Seriously, read the Iliad or the Odyssey, the word blue never appears once. The ocean is described as wine dark, not blue. Edit. Some people below me clearly missed the word barely in my description. I am not saying that ancient Greeks couldn't see the color blue, but that it was significantly harder for them to distinguish it from other, similar colors. Think navy blue versus black, but extended to all shades of blue, with lighter shades being interpreted as closer to other colors. Greeks could quite literally barely see the color blue because there was no word for blue in ancient Greek. What you're describing is a long discredited version of linguistic determinism that came about between the 40s and 60s with the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which never had any foundation in reality. People have rods and cones and pick up on light and colors in more or less the same way, though there is obviously variation between individuals in things like color blindness. Categories are culturally specific and carry more or less, or none at all, importance in different cultures, while having distinct categories for things, like colors, can lead you to differentiate between the members of those categories faster and perhaps more precisely. It does not in any way mean that you cannot perceive the difference or the color, just that you've practiced that distinction more often. Depends on the person. Culturally, it's fairly recent that popular opinion leans towards thick girls. When I was in high school, only 15 years ago, it was leaning towards curvy women, but there was still an emphasis on flat bellies and being skinny. Muffin tops were a scourge for teenage girls. Now I just assume women are more comfortable with their bodies. Where I'm at, I've seen varying body types all rocking the L-belly shirt. Also, everyone has a standard for too much butt. I saw a girl the other day and from the top up she was a normal fit girl. Then by some miracle of physiology her ass and legs were by my standards too much. I tried working for the man, and it sucked. I tried working for myself doing photography, and I loved the process of taking photos, getting lighting set up, posing models, framing the shots, etc. But when it came time to editing the photos, or promoting my work for the next job, it was excruciating. Do it then ask for money to keep doing it. This is my main problem right here. I hate asking for money. Now I work for the man, in the military, and that brings with it its own stresses, sometimes shitty hours, dumb rules, etc. But I don't want to give up my universal healthcare and guaranteed pay raises, not to mention basically getting a new job every year or two just as I'm getting bored with the old one. I've just resigned myself to the fact that I'll just have to be miserable for 1/3 RD of my life. I don't see any way around it. I don't want to be at work, even when I'm getting along with my coworkers, and until someone wants to pay me for playing video games, traveling the world, and going on weekend drives. That's just the way it's going to be. Some bosses, especially the cheapskate type, don't pay for aught, which is very common in my country, don't give increments for years, and treat their employees like shit. Yet when employees want to leave they get upset and still say stuff like employees shouldn't just work for the money. What you learn is more important than the money. They should stay loyal to the company, etc. kind of BS. So the you only work for the money thing is still being used by bosses against employees in where I live. Although employees now just won't give a fuck anymore. Haha, I knew someone would call that out. I know this sounds stupid, but I am capable of being in love with women, but it doesn't immediately come with sexual attraction, so it's confusing. Please don't come at me and say that's impossible. I dated a woman last. Thought I was doing the right thing because I'd wanted to be with her for a few years. Found out real quick that I couldn't be intimate with her at all. Haven't figured out if it's because of not being attracted to women in that way or from previous to that I haven't fully coped with. Doesn't sound stupid at all. It's completely legit to have different levels of romantic and/or sexual feelings toward a specific gender. Also, there are women and men out there that have romantic relationships with minimal or no sexual contact or only kiss/cuddles/holds hands. The important thing is that you don't force yourself to do anything you're uncomfortable with, and hopefully you have these convos early in your relationships to avoid any incompatible people. Nothing damages you and your partner for your current or future relationship like sexual resentment or re-traumatizing yourself about yourself. She was around and was one of the first people who knew about how bad my marriage was. She is the type of person, however, who gets validation from physical intimacy, which I was very clear made me uncomfortable, and often told her maybe I wasn't the person for her if I couldn't provide what she needed. For a long time, she made me feel horrible through indirect comments about it. Recently we reconnected as friends and apologized for pressuring me, especially knowing what I'd been through. Strangely enough, while I've been physically attracted to women in the past, she's the only one I'd ever considered a relationship with. It slowly sort of shifted from being used to describe a guy who is a douchebag but physically fit and assertive to a guy who is physically fit, assertive, and positive. The first change I saw I think was a green text where an anon describes their first time at the gym and how a typical Chad archetype guy took them under his wing and showed them how to do reps and boosted their confidence, basically befriended them because he saw they were there alone and totally lost. I mean, with the dozens of levels of irony most internet slang is under, it kinda depends on where you draw the line of what irony is. Is it almost always said in a kinda tongue-in-cheek playful way, and doesn't really have a place in serious conversation? Sure, but I've still seen people use he's a total Chad when they actually want to say good things about someone, whereas it used to just be a description of your stereotypical jock, bully and used in a negative context. So in that sense, the meaning has changed. I guess we could split hairs on that all day though tbh. I remember when I started working full-time in my blue-collar job when I was 18 years old back 2005. I loved gaming and other nerd activities, but I kept that for myself since it was social suicide to oust myself as an nerd among my coworkers at the time. But I've seen a nice change in the last 5-10 years. More and more of my younger coworkers openly talk about gaming and similar stuff, and it's more or less an accepted thing now. I remember a couple of years ago when I hear one coworker casually talk about gaming with the other and I thought to myself, what? Are we allowed to talk about stuff like that now? And that's more recent than people think. In like 06 when I was in high school that was still negative but not as insulting. I don't have time to source it all right now, but Treadle Media did a video featuring a thing called Tales from Genesis Space, a video made by a sci-fi fan who created short movies with 3D software back in the 90s. Later on I think he did an AMA on Reddit or something similar, and even though dude was clearly a nerd, he did not take kindly to being called that. Nerds from the 80s and 90s took a lot of abuse, not fun joking from classmates, vitriol from liking video games, computers, D&D, etc. So I sympathize that a lot of communities with older members sometimes take to gatekeeping. I can totally understand a feeling of bitterness that these things that people got their asses beat for liking are now enjoyed by the same people who bullied them. In North America, the American lobster was not originally popular among European colonists. This was partially due to the European Inlanders' association of lobster with barely edible salted seafood, and partially due to a cultural opinion that seafood was a lesser alternative to meat which did not provide either the taste or nutrients desired. It was also due to the extreme abundance of lobster at the time of the colonists' arrival, which contributed to a general perception of lobster as an undesirable peasant food. 65. The American lobster did not achieve popularity until the mid-19th century, when New Yorkers and Bostonians developed a taste for it, and commercial lobster fisheries only flourished after the development of the lobster smack. 66. A custom-made boat with open holding wells on the deck to keep the lobsters alive during transport. 67. Prior to this time, lobster was considered a poverty food or as a food for indentured servants or lower members of society in Maine, Massachusetts, and the Canadian Maritimes. Some servants specified in employment agreements that they would not eat lobster more than twice per week. 68. However, there is limited evidence for this. 69-70. Lobster was also commonly served in prisons, much to the displeasure of inmates. 71. American lobster was initially deemed worthy only of being used as fertilizer or fish bait, and until well into the 20th century, it was not viewed as more than a low-priced canned staple food. 72. It was a different story in Europe, however. Source: look at statues from Greece or Rome. They were often depicted as having smaller genitals. This is a good article on it. Basically, the modest genitals represented self-control, a quality sought after and revered by society. Although unusual by modern-day standards, A hero with a small penis was considered righteous and sensible, with superior reasoning and sound values. His potency came from his intellect, not his member. So, at one point it was better to be packing light than packing heavy. If you were bigger in those days, you were basically seen as a low class and stupid, more beast than man.